Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1100 likes on this one. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. Sit back, grab a coffee, whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the video. Tell someone you love them, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. When I was growing up, I was never afraid of the dark. I never feared the dark spaces under my bed, the gloom in the closet, the one corner of the basement that the light never seemed to reach. I didn't get scared of the knocks on the walls, the groaning of our old house settling, or the odd scraping noises outside my room at night. Even a slight flutter or tapping on my window wasn't spooky to me, and I could sleep comfortably through that night. That all comes from spending your whole childhood in a haunted house, I guess. When my room would be rearranged by an unseen force, I'd just clean it up. When cups flew across the room, I'd catch them. Eventually I started responding to the actions and even giving my friends names. It wasn't uncommon in my early teen years for my mom to hear, "Don't even think about it, Daryl," as a cup would start to slide across the table. So, I'd never been afraid of the supernatural. I believe in monsters, but I never used to be afraid of them. They all had to just be misunderstood and lonely like me, right? Right? My favorite place on the property was the knoll, a little bump of a hill at the edge of the cornfield where the woods came closest to the house. It was a good 500 feet from the barnyard, but still far enough that I could get some space and some quiet. The trees in this part of the woods were tall, far taller than the trees that covered the rest of the woodlot. Their canopies blocked out some of the sun, and their needles made the ground soft, perfect for sitting and relaxing with a thermos of cocoa and a book on an early fall afternoon, before the snow hit. It was always easy to find a place to lean, as these ancient trees had long ago lost their lower limbs, and the forest here felt like a Gothic cathedral. High vaulted pillars, the partial twilight even during the day, with small bursts of light breaking through the canopy. Even the singing of the birds or the rustling of mice was like a symphony of its own. I may have lived in the house, but I lived for the woods, especially my little part of it. My parents always taught me to come back before sunset, not to whistle, and to never follow if anyone was calling my name. I never questioned these rules. I grew up with them, after all. Mom and Dad never cared if I went to the knoll, but they wanted to make sure that I was safe. I was always happy to oblige, knowing full well that if I broke those rules, I'd be grounded and stuck inside. Even when the birds sang, I never whistled back when I was in the forest, no matter what. By now I'm assuming you've gathered that I grew up in Appalachia. Rural, lonely, isolated, surrounded by the supernatural, raised in it, so it was second nature. I guess I can thank my deeply superstitious grandmother for that. After all, it kept me alive. I can't say the same for everyone else. By the time I was in early high school, my parents were getting tired of the commute. After all, it was about an hour's drive to the nearest town. There was no cable, and the power to the house was always dicey, because squirrels would short out the transformer on the power pole about once a week. They were considering moving, and I was looking forward to not waking up at 5 a.m. for school. They'd bought a new house in town, and we were preparing to move. We'd packed anything that wasn't necessary, and had already moved it into the new house. But Mom and Dad decided to have one last house party before we threw the beds and suitcases we'd been living out of into the moving truck and finally finished the move. They invited friends, co-workers, and their kids. Many of these families were from out of town. They didn't know the rules and certainly thought we were all superstitious hicks. I wish I could say that we were just superstitious. The party started in the early afternoon on the last beautiful day in late August. The sun was shining bright, there was just enough wind to keep the bugs at bay, and everyone was basking in this truly gorgeous day. The younger kids were playing with my brothers. The older kids were with me, watching movies inside and generally being antisocial teenagers. Eventually the heat in the house drove us out into the late afternoon sun, and I began to give the tour of the property I begrudgingly agreed to hours prior. The older kids were generally polite as I showed them around, except for Cassie. Cassie wasn't from around here, and she liked to remind everyone about that. Cassie's family moved out to the middle of nowhere because her father was offered a really good job, and in a town with a low cost of living and a decent salary, they decided to relocate. Cassie had made it clear from the start that she hated everything about this new town, including everybody in it. The most interesting thing about Cassie was probably that she'd never gone in the woods around here, and she was desperate to go for a hike in the woods. In retrospect, I never should have taken her. I should have accepted being grounded for refusing to be hospitable. But hindsight is 20/20, I guess. After the cajoling, pleading, threatening, and eventual blackmail from Cassie, I backed down and showed her the knoll. I told her that a hike was out of the question after dark because the sun would be setting soon, and we shouldn't be in the woods after dark. Despite her sneering at the superstitious backwoods idiot, I refused to give in. I knew for a fact that the woods weren't safe at night. Once the sun sets, the shadows change. You can lose your way in the dark, and nocturnal predators like bobcats can hunt you silently through the brush. I was not willing to risk it. I told my mother where I was taking the group of older kids. She looked me in the eyes and told me very firmly to make sure they all follow the rules, especially the whistling. Under no circumstances should any of us whistle in the trees. I promised to go over the rules before we left. When I was returning to the group, Cassie began mocking me for having to check with my mommy before we went out for a walk. I just ignored her and turned to the group. Okay guys, there are a couple of rules before we head out. Pretty sure most of you know them, but I just need to make sure we're all on the same page. First, stick together. Second, we will be back in the barnyard by sunset. This is not negotiable. Third, under no circumstances are you allowed to whistle once we leave the yard. And lastly, if you hear anyone calling your name, we're leaving the woods. Immediately. Understood? All the locals nodded understandingly. Cassie rolled her eyes. I turned and started walking towards the knoll, followed by the older kids, including Cassie. She ran up to me and started to ask me the questions I had been dreading. The others won't tell me why the rules exist. They're pretty stupid if they don't have a reason. I mean, are the woods really that different at night? I stopped dead in my tracks. I turned to her, grabbed her by the shoulders, and looked deep into her eyes. Her normally dismissive expression turned almost fearful when I began to speak. Cassie, the woods are different at night. They completely change, and the other rules are there to make sure you don't get lost in a strange place or attract some type of predator. There are coyotes, bobcats, and God knows what else in the woods. For once in your life, shut up and listen. Please. The blood drained from Cassie's face and she nodded. I turned back to the knoll and kept walking. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, she would listen for once. The knoll was just ahead, a calm sanctuary after the craziness of the party that day. When we stepped into the shade of the ancient trees, the temperature was noticeably cooler, and the slight wind made the great giant sway gently, and produced a sound like creaking timber and a faraway whisper as it ran through the needles above us. The others looked up into the canopy. They found a place to sit and relax. I was starting to relax, my back against my favorite tree when Cassie came up to me. Hey, is the whispering in the trees normal? It sounds like my name. Cassie, it's just the wind. Seriously, you need to relax. You were the one who wanted to come out here, remember? I answered, trying to sound relaxed, but on the inside, I started to get a bit nervous. Cassie went silent for a few moments after that, and I could see her starting to relax out of the corner of my eye. I started to allow myself to calm slightly, listening to the sound of the wind in the trees. Just as I was starting to think everyone was going to be okay, Cassie turned to look deeper into the woods. She was staring intently into the gloomy trees, as if she was hearing something coming from the woods. Suddenly I had an awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. I looked over at the others, who had also noticed the difference in Cassie's behavior, and it was beginning to make them uneasy too. We all stood up, walking over to where Cassie was sitting. It was like she was hypnotized, or paralyzed, staring off into the shadowy trees. There was no sound other than the wind, no birds, none of the usual forest sounds. Out of nowhere, Cassie let out a loud whistle. I grabbed her hard by the arm, snapping her out of her trance. Realizing what she'd done, and seeing the fear in my eyes, she made to run. No, do not run. If we're being hunted, we walk quickly, but we never run. That will trigger the prey drive of whatever is out there, and that's the last thing we want. Let's go. I said in a low whisper to her and the other kids, barely audible over the now much stronger wind. We made for the safety of the house, battling against the wind that picked up since we entered the trees. It was gusting and felt like it was trying to drive us back into the woods. The dust from the barnyard stung our faces as we made our way across the field, moving slowly despite our efforts. I refused to look back at the woods, instead focusing on the adults who were suddenly rushing to get everything inside. A tablecloth blew off one of the picnic tables and flew right by us, looking every bit like a ghost as it whipped past us towards the woods. I followed it with my eyes as it flew towards the knoll. I froze in my tracks. The woods looked different, somehow changed, as if the place I had known all my childhood was darker, stranger, almost evil. I knew it wasn't possible, but I thought I heard a growl come from behind me as I stared. The impossible noise snapped me out of my stupor. I turned and began to sprint the last 100 yards to the house. "Run!" I screamed as I caught up to the group. We all broke into a dead sprint. My mother was in the barnyard when we all came flying through the gate. She tried to stop us, but we wouldn't stop all-out flight until we'd gotten through the main door of the house. As the rest of our group was catching their breath, my mom took me inside. I told her everything that happened, and she immediately looked afraid. Her expression darkened when rain began to patter against the window. The local kids and their parents left, leaving only my family and Cassie's in the house. My parents had previously offered for them to stay the night, as they lived the furthest away from our house, about an hour-and-a-half drive away. Cassie's family, not used to driving such long distances, would have been nervous in even perfect weather, let alone the thunderstorm that had blown in suddenly. My parents did everything they could to keep us all distracted from what was going on outside, and it was working for everyone except for Cassie. She kept staring out into the darkness in the direction of the knoll, every time the wind would whistle past the window. It was almost like she kept hearing her name every time the wind blew. I tried my best to relax and calm Cassie down. Eventually, by bedtime, she'd relaxed enough to lie down on the air mattress we had set up in our guest room. Knowing that she was safe in the house with her parents allowed me to finally fall asleep. At about 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the guest room door opening, which was unusual, seeing as I was used to things going bump in the night. I got up immediately, putting on my slippers and stepping out into the hallway. just as the top of Cassie's head disappeared down the stairs. She was muttering that she could hear something calling her name and she had to go. I woke my parents up and then ran down the stairs as I heard the front door creak open. My father followed me down the stairs while my mother woke her parents. As Dad and I ran out the open door into the storm, we saw Cassie walking entranced towards the gates out of the barnyard. We shouted and tried to follow, but the wind seemed to whip our voices away. Cassie's mother and father spilled out into the yard, shouting for their daughter to snap out of it. If she heard them, she didn't respond. The gate, which had been chained shut, blew wide, allowing her out of the relative safety of the barnyard, and into the open field was pitch black, easily standing 10 feet tall, with impossibly long arms and legs. Its hands were narrow, fingers long and spider-like. Dad and I froze as we watched a pitch black hand wrap around Cassie. She didn't wiggle, didn't protest as it lifted her into the air. I heard Cassie's mother scream her name, and suddenly, Cassie was gone. It was like, in the blink of an eye, whatever held Cassie had vanished back into whatever realm she'd summoned it from and taken her with it. We called the police, and they came in the morning after the storm. They said that the storm must have washed away her tracks, and that she must have been sleepwalking. We moved out of the house the same day. While Cassie's disappearance made local news, it never became a national story. I haven't even seen her disappearance being discussed on internet forums or true crime podcasts. Cassie's parents were never the same. They moved away after the case went cold. I think about what happened to Cassie almost every night, when the formerly comforting dark descends on me like a wet blanket. I no longer think that monsters are just misunderstood. I'm afraid of the dark, and I haven't set foot in the woods since. Sometimes I heard them at night. The sounds they made as they moved between the houses would wake me. I would lie there paralyzed, held under the weight of their presence until they were gone. Then I would go back to sleep and forget about it as if it had never happened. Sometimes I dreamt of a ringing phone. It's called the Alaskan Triangle, a huge area of wilderness within the 3 points of Barrow Anchorage and Juneau. The missing person rate is more than double the national average, with 17,000 people going missing in the last 30 years. When I went there, I intended to stay less than a week. I didn't come back for 10 years. My family reported me missing, but it was hopeless. I had been both arrogant and careless in my travel plans. I didn't stay in regular touch with anyone, didn't leave a detailed itinerary. I doubt they would have found me anyway, tucked away in a forest valley miles from any road. A Canadian journalist is writing a novel about what happened in that place, including my time there. Her name is Lauren Roberts, and the book is called The Black River Cult. I haven't read any of it yet, but I can tell you one thing for certain. It's not the truth, because I'm the only one who knows that. I don't really want to talk about my life before, or my family. I will do so only if it's relevant. This all started for me in 1991. I was 22, and in college studying cinematography. In truth, there was not enough studying and too much partying. Despite my morning academic failures, I did exhibit a genuine talent for photography. It was the one thing I could always find time for. So, perhaps unsurprisingly, my finest achievement stemmed from it. Whilst taking pictures of birds in an abandoned factory, I had the idea for my first and only publication. It was a collection of photographs of American ghost towns. The shots of each location were accompanied by a brief history of the site and any particularly interesting local tales. It became a surprise hit and was successful enough to buy me time and expenses for a sequel. I dropped out of college without a second thought to work on it full time. I decided to expand the scope to include both North and South America, featuring less locations with more detail on each. I was ambitious, full of ideas and energy. I was also stupid, selfish, and ignorant. Within a month, I had been shot at in Colombia, hospitalized for illness in Brazil, and failed to even find my target in Mexico. My fourth location was to be a site in Alaska. I still lived in Seattle after going to school there, so I thought I'd take the scenic route and drive myself. I spent a beautiful couple of weeks passing through Vancouver and British Columbia on the way to Anchorage, listening to music and watching those sunsets. I was as happy as I'd ever been in my life, but didn't realize it at the time. We never do we? That's when you're truly happy, I think. When you are chasing what you want. So on I went. I was searching for an abandoned mining town in the south of the Brooks Range, a site that should have been untouched by humans for 80 years. Rather predictably, I got lost. I ended up driving in the dark, which I had promised myself I wouldn't do, trying to read a map by torchlight. What an idiot. At daybreak, through binoculars, I spotted what I believed was my destination. I could see a gated-up tunnel entrance and some old fencing on a distant mountainside. I set off, full of relief, and promptly managed to get lost again. Thankfully, I was in no rush. At that time of year, sunset wasn't until after 11 p.m. In the end, I never even made it there, because I found something else. There had been no sign of the place until I was almost on top of it, exploring a side road, which was more than a worn path. In hope of a shortcut, I caught sight of something through the trees. It was a church surrounded by half a dozen smaller houses. It looked decades old, but I couldn't give an age with any degree of certainty. Every building was badly weathered, paint stripped from rotting wood, doors and windows mostly gone. 2 of the homes had collapsed completely. The church itself was a simple cross design, I'd estimate only 20 meters or so in length with a 10-meter tower. The entire area was flooded with dark, still water which averaged a foot or so depth around the buildings. Elsewhere it was impossible to tell. Past the town I could see a shallow river, the water strangely black from whatever it was carrying out of the hills. There were no signs of any people, vehicles, or animals. A piece of history, frozen in time, held still in an ink-dark pool. I was delighted. This was even better than what I had planned. With a smile, I exited the car and took a deep breath of the crisp air, marveling at my discovery. I remember thinking as I stood there, how many sites like this were there in the world? After images of life, places that people never even lay eyes on for decades at a time. Who even founded this place? Where did they go? I had a routine for work and got straight into it, as well as my camera equipment. I had, for the first time in my life, a loaded gun. As unlikely as it was that I would encounter wolves, it was still a possibility. Buying and learning to use a gun was about the only sensible thing I actually done before leaving. If I recall correctly, I began by taking some distant shots, working my way back in from the road. I wanted to record how I had discovered the place. Then several wide shots, taking in the entire site in a single frame. The silence of the area struck me as much as anything. I was in the wilderness, yet it was deathly quiet. I never saw an animal, not so much as a rabbit or a bird. There was barely a breeze, and the water was still as black glass. I photographed the river, then the surrounding valley. It was thickly forested on all sides, which kept the old buildings in almost constant shade. While taking these pictures, I realized just how difficult this place would be to find, even from the air. No wonder I had never heard of it. I worked for a couple of hours trying to get the best angles with the changing light, even wading through the water for better spots. It was at least knee-deep in most places and bitterly cold. On one occasion, I actually had to break some ice to plant my feet. I remember I was at the front of the church, a few feet out into the water when I heard it. Something moving. There was a crack like a piece of wood being snapped, then a splash. I saw ripples on the surface come out from behind the church. I stood there, frozen to the spot. I even held my breath in the silence. There was nothing more. No sound or sign of movement. This was stupid, I told myself. It was an old building. Things fall apart. Maybe a nesting bird knocking something over. Though I hadn't seen any yet. I waited, quiet and stationary, for another minute or so. Nothing. I took a long look around. Not a thing had changed except my car now looked uncomfortably far away. I had considered moving it in closer, but was afraid of getting stuck in mud. I shook myself, irritated by my own reaction. I was being a spineless fool, I thought. A bit of wood falls and suddenly I'm terrified. I had work to do. More than anything, I wanted to shoot inside the church. I could see only a little through the missing front doors, which wasn't nearly enough. I couldn't help myself. I knew I would regret it forever if I didn't at least try. The pictures from outside were good, but I wanted to capture people's imaginations. And for that, I needed to see inside. So I moved forward again, one shuffled step at a time. The depth of the water stayed consistent, and there were no ripples but the ones I made myself. It took a few minutes, but I reached the doorframe and hauled myself through. It wasn't what I had expected. The floor of the main hall had been almost completely torn up, leaving only a few feet of floorboard around the edges. Where the floor had been was only black water, as still as it was outside. The remains of a pew floated on the surface. What had been the pulpit leaned broken over the pool, as if ready to tumble in itself. What happened here? An earthquake? I looked for a stable piece of flooring, then started to edge my way around against the wall. The wood beneath me collapsed. It felt instantaneous. The water suddenly all around me and my mouth, crushing me in its grasp as I sank. My feet never touched the bottom, so I'll never know how deep it really was. It couldn't have lasted for more than 30 seconds, but it still shakes me to recall. The adrenaline, the stinging cold, that rush of panic that shuts out the world. I managed to kick and claw my way back to the surface then, gasping for air, dragging myself into the nearest piece of flooring. I was soaked through and shaking uncontrollably. I had lost my gun, lost a boot, and cut my forearm, which was now dripping blood. To top it all, the doorway was now out of reach on the other side of the hall. Unless I wanted to go back in the water. At least my camera was waterproof. I was furious with myself. In all honesty, it makes me angry even now just writing it down. Stupid, stupid, stupid. What had I been thinking? What had possessed me to take such an idiotic and pointless risk? Now I only had a few hours till sunset, and the temperature was plummeting. But I was safe, I told myself, in an effort to calm down. No broken bones, no serious wounds, no ongoing danger. I just had to work my way back to the car and I would be fine. It was an accident, nothing more. Eventually I managed to price out a loose window frame and clambered through. My prayers were answered and there was a shallower area leading to drier land, although not in the direction I wanted. Still, I had no choice. I wanted away from that water and back to my car. The sun was going down. I was shivering with cold and despite my best efforts, beginning to panic. I finally made it out of the water, but now I was on the opposite side from my vehicle. I was looking for a route back to it when I saw the path, clearly worn in the grass. It led into the foothills, following the river. Animals, maybe, I told myself. Maybe not. I had started to cough, a strange taste in my mouth from the water I had swallowed. I went a little up the path, hoping it might fork off around the buildings. The coughing continued, so hard it made me dizzy. I walked further, getting out of sight of my car. I wasn't thinking clearly. I can see that now. That's when I saw people further up the hillside watching me. I stumbled, trying to shout for help, but I couldn't get the words out. I was struggling for breath. Despite the cold, I could feel myself sweating heavily, my chest burning and head spinning. I must have passed out because that's the last thing I remember. What followed will be incredibly difficult to explain. In the 10 years after discovering the church, my memories are both vague and sporadic. The order of events and time between is unclear, like trying to recall things from preschool age. I was living in a village with approximately 30 others, an hour's walk away from the abandoned church. I have no recollection of traveling there, or agreeing to stay. In my last clear memory, I am coughing, retching, desperate. In the next, I am a villager, in a concealed settlement in the hills. I have a daily routine I follow, and I have no intention of ever leaving. I had become a completely different person, but seemed unaware of the change. It's more like remembering a film than my own life. The memories of those years are all surface, no layers of nuance to the thoughts. I was myself, but not myself. As if parts of me were missing or sealed away. The closest analogy would be sleepwalking, but in truth, it wasn't like that at all. There were rare, clear images. Occasionally something would upset me, but the feelings would be quickly pushed away, and I would return to passivity. These moments seemed to stay with me for some reason, as unpleasant as they were. An example: I remember once watching the pigs we kept as they ate and slept in their pen. One was to be slaughtered that night. Watching them filled me with a sickened dread, yet I had no idea why. I should describe life there, I think, before I go any further. How I spent the decade. There were 6 homes in 2 rows of 3, well concealed in the thick forest. I'm using the term homes quite loosely here. I've seen tents that were more complex. 2 doors, 1 front and 1 rear. 2 floors with no further segregation of rooms. No windows or running water. They would actually be better described as shelters. One of them had 6 wooden cots downstairs, but otherwise we slept on blankets on the floor. There were some vehicles there of varying ages and conditions. I never saw any used for any purpose. We had pigs the first few years I was there, but they didn't last. We foraged for food, hunted, and fished in the surrounding area. What we caught was cooked over an open fire. The Black River ran past us a few minutes' walk away. Once a week, at daybreak, we went together down to the church. In silence, we would line up and kneel at the water's edge. Usually this lasted only a minute or so. I have no idea why we did this, and I don't believe I knew then either. I only understood that it had to be done. I witnessed what appeared to be panic attacks among the others, particularly at the waterside. They would calm quickly, of course, as I would. Then we all forgot about it as if nothing had happened. I never thought about my family, or friends, or life before. Or perhaps I did, and it was simply pushed down and forgotten before I could grasp it. I know I still dreamt. I know this because the panic of waking from these dreams was the strongest emotion I felt, and it was always the same dream. A ringing phone. I never saw anyone touch except at night when we huddled together for warmth. I have very short memories of intensely painful migraines, always when I strayed too far from the river. I've just received an advance copy of the book, which I wasn't expecting, since I declined to give Miss Roberts an interview. To be fair to her, she didn't press the issue. The first chapter covers what the police found on the site. It's a strange feeling to see these pictures after so many years. I don't quite know how to describe it. There was no one there when they first arrived. Every house was empty. After searching from, the officers followed the river down to the church. One of them found a piece of clothing floating on the water. When they pulled it out, it was still attached to a broken collarbone. The situation progressed quite dramatically after that. Teams of forensic specialists and investigators. After further discoveries, they decided to drain the water from the site, and they found more bones, thousands of bones, at least 90 individuals dating back over 100 years. Life in that place changed for me in June of 2001, 10 years after I first arrived. 5 of us had been out hunting, and by the time we returned, 3 of us were vomiting and feverish. I don't know what caused it. Water we shared perhaps, but there could be any number of reasons. I was one of those affected. The fever nearly killed me, leaving me delirious and hallucinating. I don't recall it clearly, of course. Not at all. I would guess I was in and out of consciousness for almost a week. I thought I could hear that ringing phone, the one from my dream. It was somewhere in the house. I was sure of it. If only I could get up and I could find it. Why couldn't someone answer it? Then I would slip back into unconsciousness. And so it went. Eventually the fever broke and I opened my eyes. I lay on one of the cots, my clothing soaked in sweat and blood running from my nose and down my chest. The room was bare other than the beds and a jug of water. I was alone and I could hear no one else nearby. Pain, exhaustion, fear, all these things are easy to understand as we have all felt them. But I don't think I can truly convey the confusion I experienced in any relatable way. I hardly knew who I was, never mind where or when. Despite this, there was a freshness to my thoughts, a new clarity. I felt changed, almost like sobering up. I had to use the toilet, so I began to struggle to my feet. I knew the toilet was outside, though I couldn't have told you how I knew or when I had last used it. I called for help, but there was no answer. Someone had clearly cleaned me and brought me water, so I was certain there were still people nearby. But who and where? As I exited the rear door, a terrible migraine struck me. A pressure like I have never experienced before or since. People use words like unbearable far too casually. This was truly unbearable. It is no exaggeration to say I would have chosen death over that pain if it had continued. I staggered through the trees, almost blind with the pain, shaking, legs buckling under me. I may have cried out, but I don't think I would even have known. I fell and lay on my side. A sudden flow of blood from my nose terrified me even through the pain. Something spasmed behind my eyes, and I heard a crack. I must have been paralyzed by what was happening because I neither moved or made any sound. More cracks were followed by a fresh explosion of pain, and I had the first seizure of my life. Then darkness. I thought I was going to die, was certain of it in fact. I don't know how long I lay there. When I came fully around, there was a foul taste in my mouth, and I felt open wounds on my tongue and gums. I could hear breath rasping through the swollen throat. My eyes focused, and mine cleared. In the mud beside me, there was a bloodied lump of flesh. It was perhaps the size of a walnut, a smooth oval. Red and black with dozens of hair-like tendrils extending from the edges. It moved, just a fraction of an inch, twitching, then stopped. I tried to stand, to get back to the house, but the pain overwhelmed me again. My head swam and I collapsed within a few meters. This time, I was out for several hours. I was examined by a doctor when I escaped this place. Several doctors, in fact. The skull fracture between my eyes appeared to have been caused by internal pressure. They said they had never seen anything like it in a living patient. My nose was broken. My sinuses and throat were massively inflamed and lined with deep tears. A CT scan revealed extensive scarring, particularly in my frontal and prefrontal lobes. Brain damage is the simple term. I have never, and will never, recover from these things. Headaches, tremors, confusion. I still have seizures. These things, among others, will accompany me until I die. When I woke up again, I had been carried back to bed and cleaned. I realized this was the extent of the care I could expect. There would be no real medical attention there. No medication. I heard people downstairs this time, but I couldn't move. Couldn't even open my swollen eyes. Pain, then sleep. A night passed. In the morning I could sit up and think clearly again. I examined myself in more detail. My hands were dirty. In fact, all of me was. My clothing was a patchwork of poor repairs. I had long hair tied back and a graying beard. What had happened to me? What had been the thing I had choked up in the grass? After several attempts, I made it to the doorway and looked out. Some of the other villagers were gathering firewood. I watched them in silence for several minutes. They moved slowly, pausing between each action. No one spoke. There was no eye contact. Where had these people come from? Had they arrived here like myself? Were they sick? There were both men and women of many ages and ethnicities, all severely underweight. The men had beards and long hair like I did. Many had visible wounds or sores on their skin, dry lips and dead eyes. There were missing fingers, presumably from frostbite. Something flickered in the back of my mind and I pulled off one of my battered shoes. I was missing 2 toes myself. I had no recollection of it happening. I realized I was seeing things as they really were, for the first time since I had arrived. I tried with increasing desperation to recall the last few years. Had I been like them for all this time? The only memories I could conjure were disconnected snapshots, tiny fragments of the years. Through them all was a vague sensation of being prompted, urged to do these things. A feeling of always being watched and guided. Too weak to walk any further, I returned to the cot. I figured whoever had been bringing me water would return eventually. Then I could get some answers. It was a woman who came just before sunset. She walked in with a fresh jug of water, eyes staring blankly. She saw that I was awake, replaced the water, then left without a word. I called after her, but she ignored me. That night, others came to sleep in the house, but never so much as looked at me and would not respond to any questions. The next day, hunger forced me outside. Some clearer memories had started to return, but it was a slow process. I knew I usually helped with fishing and hunting. That was my duty in the village. Food was community taken once in the afternoon. I got through that day, ate with the others, and followed along with them as they went to sleep. Small parts of my old life were also coming back to me. Flashes of my childhood, names, lyrics of songs. I remembered my parents and cried like a baby. Were they looking for me? I wondered. At that point, I didn't know how long I had been away. Did they even know I was still alive? Were they? I remembered the front door of an apartment in Seattle. It was my home, or at least it had been. Among these memories were flashes of terrible scenes, some half-recalled nightmare filtering through, images of people being torn apart, wide-eyed and wide awake, staring into space as they died, as if they didn't feel a thing. They were real memories. I was sure of it. I had seen these things happen. Over and over I would touch on the truth and my mind would recoil from it. Something I should be afraid of. Something that came at night. There are photographs of many of the villagers in Lauren Roberts' book. Smiling pictures with family members from their lives before. Some faces I recognized. There were names and backgrounds for each of them. When they went missing, what remains were found of them. Perhaps only a jawbone, or a wedding ring. Dozens of photos and not one of them made it back to those lives. Miss Roberts has quite the theory about it all. She thinks these people went there to escape their own lives, that they were sucked up by just another cult, hidden away from modern life. She thinks it was a twisted religion which lived and died out of sight in the cold. She thinks these people killed each other one at a time and put the bodies in the water. Then the last few fled. She thinks all the evil in the world comes from men and women. She is wrong about all these things. I had planned to leave the village as soon as I was strong enough. In the meantime, I struggled to play along. It was like living and speaking with mute children. Everything so basic, so simple. Anything out of the ordinary was pushed away and ignored. They would stare into space for hours on end. So I planned and prepared, hoarding extra clothing and food and trying to remember. I had been dreaming again of the ringing phone when I woke. It was pitch black outside, maybe 1 a.m. if I had to guess. I heard others in the house getting up and going downstairs. They seemed even more oblivious to their surroundings than usual. I followed. No idea what was happening, but wary of being singled out. We fled out into the moonlit street. Everyone had gathered in front of their houses, shivering in the cold. There was a sick feeling rising in my stomach, something trying to be remembered. They all lined up on either side of the street, heads down, silent and waiting. I copied, taking my place with my eyes on the ground at my feet. A memory was rising from the dark. It comes here from the water at night. I heard something moving through the trees. No one else seemed to have noticed. Remember, it walks down the line between us. I was too afraid to run at this point or even raise my head. There was movement at the edge of my vision, near the end of the street. Heavy footsteps, long, slow breathing, and the smell of stagnant water. It was coming closer. I could make out 2 thin legs, but the feet had sunk into the wet ground. The skin was dark red and black like the parasite I had choked up onto the grass. Closer. The upper body towered over me, and I could feel it there. Feel the heat from it. It had come level with me. Only a few feet away. There was a pain in my chest, and I thought, now was the time. Run or die. Now. It passed by. I nearly bit through my tongue, holding in my breath. Then, as relief had begun to wash through me, the figure stopped, sniffing the air. It took a step back, leaning in toward me. A long skeletal hand touched my face, and a nail scraped slowly down my cheek, leaving a line of red. Now. Someone opposite panicked and ran. Their feet splashed in the mud as they raced for the tree line, stumbling and crying out in the dark. The thing lunged away from me toward the runner. It was frighteningly fast, covering the distance before I even realized what was happening. I didn't dare raise my head, so saw only part of what happened. The man who had fled was pinned face down, helpless. It held him there, apparently without effort, as he fought to free himself, and it began to eat him, beginning with the back of the head, neck, and shoulders. A second one rushed forward out of the darkness and snatched at a leg, pulling it free. The man was screaming, a desperate, incoherent howl, begging for anyone to help him, for God to help him. We all stood there as it happened, still and quiet. Here it was, the truth behind my nightmares. When it was over, we faded back into the houses, no sign of what happened on anyone's face but mine. I recognized the man who had ran, who had saved my life in doing so. He was one of the others who had been hunting and got sick, like me. Had he been through what I had since then, surviving the fever, then playing along as he planned to escape? We had sat together at meal the day before, side by side in silence. I could remember all the other times now, all those taken from the line and eaten alive in the dirt. They never cried out, never fought or ran. They never made a sound. At daybreak, I stole a motorcycle and all the gasoline I could. The 3 other vehicles I had tried didn't even start. The bike was from a more recent addition to the camp, but I couldn't remember who. I waited till no one was nearby, then set off, heading the opposite way from the water. I thought my old car might still be there, but the thought of going near that church was too much. I didn't look back. I would drive until I ran out of gas. I figured I would rather die alone in the wild than face another night there. It was luck more than anything that saved me. When the gas ran out, I walked for 2 days. Nearly died of cold both nights, despite my preparations. It had been any other time of the year, I wouldn't have made it, not even close. A trucker found me on the Dalton Highway, lying unconscious at the side of a road. I don't even remember it. He took me straight to the nearest town, saved my life. His name is Kyle and he became a grandfather last year. We still message each other from time to time. When I woke in a hospital bed, I asked for the police. Then I called my mom and dad. It wasn't an easy conversation as my memory still had more gaps than pieces. At first, I don't think they even believed it was me. Details came back slowly, over many months. Faces, names, places, feelings. Eventually, my parents took me home and I stayed with them until I had recovered. Physically, at least. One day in the hospital, I heard a phone ringing in the hall, and the memory finally returned. Here it was at last. I had a girlfriend, Abby. Her face, her voice, it all came back. A wash of images and emotions. We had been seeing each other for 6 months, the longest relationship I had ever had. I thought I loved her. I told her I did. Something else. The last thing I'd done before leaving for Anchorage 10 years earlier. The day I had called her to say goodbye and tell her I would be back in a few weeks. She was quiet for a moment, then said she was pregnant. She sounded scared. And how did I respond? I hung up the phone in a fit of temper. Angry, selfish, young, and stupid. I didn't want a baby. I felt like she had done this to try and steal my future. I was an idiot. A 22-year-old boy who didn't want to deal with real life. Who could look at the world and only see himself. She tried to phone back, but I walked away, leaving it ringing. So I lost them both. My daughter, who I never met, died in an accident age 4. Her mother left the country after that. I asked my parents and friends about her, but she had never told them the truth. Eventually I managed to track down her brother. He was the one who explained what had happened, but he didn't know where she was. No one had heard from her in years, he said. Eventually I stopped trying. All it could do was hurt us both. The police went to the Black River site while I was still in hospital, somehow finding it even with my laughable directions. I never told them the whole truth of what happened, of course. They would have thought I had lost my mind, and understandably so. I don't think they even believed my edited version until they found those first bones. I had lived a lie for 10 years. That time was lost, stolen from me. Since I came back, I've just lived a different lie. A pieced-together impression of the man I was before. I would like to say I've recovered, but it would be a lie. I think about that place every day. It's difficult to be a part of things now, to feel things as I used to. I've never married or had children, never rebuilt old friendships. Even now, decades later, I'm afraid to have anything, wondering when another phone will ring and everything will change again. Truth is, I don't know. I want to try to help anyone else who may experience what I did last Monday night. I still don't know how I got away from them. When I say them, I'm talking about the crawling men. I didn't break my usual routine when I got back from work that Monday. I got in and was immediately greeted by my German Shepherd Max. I was, though, later than usual, as an accident en route had held me up somewhat. I could tell Max was getting hungry as he clawed at his bowl soon after I arrived. I filled it with a pungent mixture of lamb and vegetables, as I got him to sit. His tongue licked his lips while he whimpered in anticipation as I placed his bowl on the floor and gestured him to eat. Once his snout was buried in his bowl, I made myself an omelet, full of ham and mushrooms. After we had eaten, we sat and watched an episode of Police Interceptors, while we waited for our food to digest. Once the episode had finished, I grabbed Max's leash and we headed out on our nightly walk. I walk the route on a daily basis, normally around an hour earlier though. We headed across the road and onto a woodland trail that would eventually take us back around to a main road that led us back home. I let Max off his leash and he began to zigzag, nose to ground ahead of me as usual. I had my flashlight with me, so I wasn't too uneasy about the darkness the woodland shed on us. I also felt at ease with Max by my side. He was a big softy, especially with me, but also other people. But if he was threatened, I know that he would fiercely protect us both. We were around halfway through the wooded track when a distressing scream ripped through the distant trees ahead. I jumped, clutching the flashlight firmly while running it side to side through the upcoming foliage. Max was barking furiously while I tried to quiet him. I didn't want to draw any unnecessary attention to our presence. Max quieted down after I gave him some treats I had stashed in a pouch in my coat pocket. We then cautiously ventured further into the woods. I was telling myself it was probably just some kids messing around, but I started to feel very uneasy. Like every bone in my body wished for me to turn around. The sounds echoed around us again. This time 2 blood-curdling screams radiated towards me. They sounded louder, closer, and more manic. Max now seemed scared, his tail propped between his legs. I tried to reassure him as best I could as he stood behind me. A growl then came rasping through his gritted, snarling teeth. I shone my flashlight up and down the dense bushes 30 yards from where I stood, planted to the spot. The rustling leaves and the sound of twigs breaking under slow stalking movement was the only thing that my ears could hear. Suddenly appearing from within the bushes ahead of me, 3 sets of glowing amber eyes. Max suddenly bolted off behind me. I called out to him, but his running and barking droned off into the distance. I should have followed, but I just couldn't move. Like all of my muscles had turned to stone. Every time I shone the light on the watching eyes, they would disappear instantly. They would soon reappear just as quickly, but from a different location from within the twisted branches. Shadowy figures then seemed to dance and distort within the thick, overgrown shrubs. The few outreaching, leaf-covered twigs swaying up and down and side to side, Dried leaves began to crunch and rattle just before it all fell silent. My short, quivering breath and pulsing veins around my ears were the only things I could hear as fear took over my body. In my state of terror, I made my first vital error. I looked back behind me, looking for some sort of escape. When I had looked towards the bushes once again, I was faced with 3 men. Well, men in the loosest sense of the word. They were more like savage creatures, perched on all fours, half submerged from the thin branches and leaves that surrounded them. My light exposed their thick black hair that covered almost the entirety of their scrawny bodies, faces covered in blood, dirt, and tufts of hair. Their features were both human and inhuman at the same time, with thin pale lips gripping tightly around pointed blood-stained teeth. Their eyes glowed bright amber, with piercing black oval pupils at the center. They were, for the moment, motionless. Their blotchy, bruised skin was emitting fine steam, as if my flashlight's illumination was burning into their flesh. I then made my second mistake. Almost instinctively, I turned and ran. I could hear the sound of their rapidly approaching, scurrying footsteps. The sound of pounding dirt and broken sticks grew louder as I only prayed I could keep my footing through the root-covered track. I glanced back as they once again stood motionless, all staring deep into my eyes. I stopped to gather my breath after realizing that they only ever moved once I stopped looking at them. I backed away slowly, lifting my feet so I didn't trip in the process. I glanced behind me quickly as I saw the illuminating glow of streetlights, exposing the woodland exit. I shot my head forward as I heard their prowling movement, but again they all stood, unnervingly still. I continued to pace carefully backwards when my flashlight began to flicker. This couldn't be happening, I remember thinking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. Then, darkness. The only light source had failed me. I then heard the roaring, harmonized screams from the 3 predators in front of me. I had 20 yards left between me and the end of this tree-shrouded hellhole. I threw my flashlight in anger and desperation at them and proceeded to sprint towards the lit road. The sound of fast-crawling limbs and their erratic screams grew louder and louder. Just before I got to the edge of the exit, I felt a sharp pain in my lower right leg as a clawed hand grabbed my ankle. I fell. My head and torso was halfway onto the street-lit path. I turned and stared at them all. They were frozen solid, as I glanced down to see the lead creature's talons embedding into my leg. Blood then trickled and dripped onto the dirt below. My body and breath quivered in fear, as I was sure they were waiting for me to bleed out before dragging me back into the depths of the woodland. Just as my vision began to fade, I heard a snarling growl behind me. Max jumped over my struggling body and lashed onto the creature's bony arm attached to me. I noticed that Max already had blood around his mouth, as if he had already just attacked something else. The creature's wide eyes were fixated on mine, as it opened its mouth unnaturally wide and let out a deafening cry. Its agonizing clasp on my leg suddenly released, as Max's head shook that thing's arm like a rag doll. I dragged myself backwards into the path shrouded in the orange glow of the streetlight above. Max let go of the creature, which was now laying motionless in the dirt. There were now 3 creatures hunched over stood behind it. Max growled and snarled as he guarded my attempt to stand. I then limped across the road towards my house. I glanced back into the wooded opening just as I caught 4 of the creatures disappear into the darkness. In that moment, I realized that Max hadn't bolted away and left me earlier. He had been chasing down another one of them terrifying creatures that was creeping up behind us. By the looks of it, he caught it just before coming back to my aid. I owe my life to my best friend Max. He really did save me that night. I got home and cleaned my wounds and called the police. I told them what I saw. I showed them my blood in the opening of the trail and what these creatures looked like. They sent a team in not long after to clear the woods, but they found nothing but a dripping trail of blood that quickly dissipated into the foliage. I still see them from my window at night, their amber eyes appearing from deep into the woodland. I still don't know what them creatures were, and why they only moved in the cover of darkness. All I know is that night will be the last time I ever enter those woods again. If you ever see, through the darkness, glowing amber eyes, do not turn and run. Back away slowly. Look straight at them, and I really hope you have a light source with you, as they seem to avoid it at all costs. Remember, never, ever turn your back. That's when they'll get you. I've been single for the past 12 years. I don't know if I will ever find love again, and I sure as hell hope it doesn't find me. My therapist recommended I give writing a try. Something about closure. I was married once, and I'm still trying to recover from what happened. So here goes nothing. This is my attempt at journaling what happened. Annie was the love of my life. I worshipped the ground she walked on. We had been married 2 years at the time, and they'd been the fastest 2 years of my life. I would say we had a really good thing going, or at least we did before I found out about Mark. Mark was just a coworker, according to Annie. Maybe he erred on the side of a bit too friendly or lacking boundaries, but those were her words. To me, he was a weirdo who clearly wanted to put a baby in my wife. I thought it was all one-sided until one afternoon when I stumbled upon a video on my wife's phone of Mark taking Annie from behind. It was an unsuspecting Tuesday in June. The summer evening air flowed in through the open windows of the kitchen, carrying with it the sweet fragrance of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. The sun had just set, casting a warm orange glow across the sky. The sound of crickets and cicadas could be heard in the distance, providing a soothing background noise. As I stood by the sink, I watched as the last bit of light faded away, leaving behind a serene darkness. My neighbor Terry was locking away his mower for the night, as he waved at me from his yard. I truly believe this to be the last happy moment I would experience in my life. Anne was in the shower when I saw it. I needed to go into her Google Calendar and add an appointment or grab a mutual friend's number from her contacts. I don't even remember anymore. All I remember is the message that conveniently popped up as I unlocked her phone. It was from Mark. Is Jack still leaving next weekend for his business trip? Curiously, I tapped the notification and quickly skimmed their message thread together. It looked like it was all innocent enough until I got to the video. The video showed a side profile of what was going on, as if it was propped up on a nightstand. I could tell it was filmed in a crappy hotel, the kind you only stay at when you're either hiding or shooting dope. In the frame, I could see that Mark had his hands firmly planted on Annie's hips and lower back. I'll leave the rest to your imagination. I never thought it would happen to me. My wife, my rock, my everything. My Annie. But when I found the video, I couldn't deny it any longer. My stomach churned as I imagined her in the arms of another man, moaning his name into his ear. My mind spun with thoughts of revenge, of screaming and yelling and breaking things, but deep down, all I felt was hollow emptiness. How could she do this to me? Was I not enough? I wasn't sure how to react, so I didn't. Once Annie was out of the shower and dried off, she came and found me in the living room to let me know she wanted to go to bed. I told her that I would be there shortly, and to not wait up as I wanted to catch up on my show, avoiding eye contact and feigning indifference. The burning I felt in my face was akin to the surface of the sun as she softly spoke. Eventually she left me to my own devices. As the minutes went by, the clock hit midnight and I could no longer stagnate on the couch. I decided a night walk around my neighborhood was what I needed to come up with my next move. I stepped out into the warm summer night, feeling the familiar crunch of gravel beneath my sneakers. The air was thick with humidity, and the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the sharp tang of gasoline from passing cars. The sky was a deep shade of blue, with stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across a black velvet canvas. As I walked, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, the kind that only comes with the stillness of a summer evening. I passed by houses with windows aglow in soft yellow light, the distant sound of laughter and music drifting through the air. It was a moment of tranquility in an otherwise hectic world, and I savored every step I took, knowing that when I went back home, my entire life was going to be different. As I rounded the corner onto the street I lived on, I noticed something odd. Terry, my neighbor, had left his garage door wide open. As I approached, I saw that it was empty, lit with only a warm, incandescent light bulb hanging into the ceiling. That was certainly unusual for Terry, as he was a very fastidious neighbor, and made sure his doors were always locked and his property was all buttoned up. A real square. I walked around the side of the garage and climbed the 3 steps to his front door, and as I raised my hand to knock, the door fell slightly open. Terry peeked around the small crack and looked puzzled as if I had walked in on a private matter. Hey, Terry, it looks like your garage door is wide open, man. Just a heads up, I uttered meekly. Oh, thanks, Jack. I must have left it open when I put my shears away earlier. What are you doing out here so late, by the way? Terry replied, almost suspiciously. Had a rough night. I like to walk sometimes to clear my head, especially if I need to make a big decision, or feel better about something. I confided in my neighbor. Do you want to come in for a drink? I know it's late, but it looks like neither of us are ready for the night to be over. Terry asked, almost too excitedly. I thought about it momentarily, but ultimately decided to take him up on his offer. As I entered his home, I took note that the inside of his house was just as clean as the outside. The faint smell of bleach wafting into my nostrils told me that he was sanitary, clinical even. I followed him sheepishly into his kitchen where he was already putting a bottle of what looked to be bourbon out of his cupboard. He poured me a shot, and this is when things get a bit blurry. We were pounding down shot after shot, admittedly a little too quickly before I started to notice what was happening to me. My heart was rapidly beating in my chest, while my brain seemed to be moving at a snail's pace, and my vision moving even slower. I took a seat at his counter, and inhaled a deep breath of the clean, slightly bleach-smelling air. So, why are you really walking around the middle of the night, Jack? Terry prodded, with his eyes narrowed. He seemed unaffected by the alcohol. I have a tough decision to make tonight. With the wife, you know? I slurred back. Terry nodded. You finally caught on to her and Mark, huh, Jackie boy? It took you long enough. I had them figured out months ago. Did you know that he likes to have your wife in the kitchen too? With the curtains open in the middle of the day? I can see exactly what he likes to do to your wife from my garden shed. Terry stated calmly. My stomach dropped, my heart skipped a beat, and my brain began to freeze in place. I could no longer think. If I was standing, I surely would have stumbled and fell over. It was all too much to take in, especially in my inebriated state of mind. I stared at Terry with tears forming in my eyes, unable to speak. I like you, Jack. You've always been a good neighbor, and you always keep things to yourself. I think I may have something that'll make you feel better." Terry stood up and beckoned for me to follow. I felt like I was in a trance and was falling victim to the power of suggestion. I followed him down the steps to his basement. A narrow hallway opened to a room full of large chest freezers. The room easily was 30 by 30, and each wall had its own row of freezers, with the cords plugged into a slew of longer extension cords. This felt wrong. I knew I should not be down there, and I knew I had to run, but my brain-body connection was non-existent, and I felt like I had no control over my own movements. We reached the back further corner of the freezer room when he approached one of the units in the corner. He pulled the key out of his pocket and unlocked the lid. When he lifted it, I immediately recognized what was inside. There were 2 bodies laying in sardine style. On the right-hand side, I recognized the face of Mark, and it seemed to be permanently frozen into an expression of fear. Primal, unfiltered fear. His throat was cut, and all the blood had been cleaned from the wound to leave a small incision that had not been stitched. My head slowly turned to the left-hand side, where I saw my Annie. She was clearly deceased, and her eyelids were surgically removed. Terry finally spoke. "I made her watch, Jack. They drank the same thing you did. They followed me down here with no objections. They even climbed in themselves, and Annie watched helplessly as I drained Mark of his blood. I did you a favor. All your problems have been solved. I did this for you, Jack." Something in me woke up. Instinctually, my legs gained sentience, and my brain kicked into overdrive. Before I knew what was happening, I was sprinting out of Terry's front door and was halfway down the block. I reached the end of the street and charged into the local 24/7 corner store where a terrified middle-aged cashier helped me dial the police. The rest of the night was a blur. I was hauled into the police station for questioning, and Terry was arrested on suspicion of over a dozen counts of murder. By the end of that week, it sounded like the prosecutor had planned on letting him ride the lightning in the electric lazy boy, but I knew that could sometimes take a decade or more. He is probably still awaiting his execution. Whenever I am cleaning my house with bleach, I think about Terry. Whenever I go down to the basement of my new house, I think about how annoying it was moving all those old freezers out of there, and how expensive it was upgrading to newer models. I'm an archaeologist, or rather, I'm an archaeology graduate. I completed my degree last year, and I've been trying to get into a postgraduate course since then. It's a competitive field with few positions open. I narrowly missed my chance last summer, and I've been working in a bank while I apply for more positions. I studied at an English university, specializing in the Saxon settlement of Britain in the 6th century. Last month, one of my professors, who I'll call Sharon, emailed me. Somebody had found a possible new settlement. I won't say exactly where, but it's further west than any previously known Saxon village. She had been excavating for some time and needed help with the work. I was wary of leaving the bank at such short notice, but when she hinted that additional funding for the dig might lead to a post-grad position opening up, I stopped caring about my reference from the bank. So the next morning I was on a train with little more than warm clothes, a sleeping bag, and a laptop. By lunchtime I arrived at the station, and Sharon picked me up and we headed out to the site. England is very heavily developed, and you're never more than a few kilometers from at least a small village, so the fact that we drove off-road in the Jeep for nearly half an hour was quite remarkable. Apparently some scouts had been on a hiking trip and found a mostly buried wall. This sort of thing must happen all the time, but This time they had mentioned it to their scoutmaster, who was a historian and took an interest, eventually leading to the university getting involved. By the time I got there, the excavation had been going for a while. The outline of several buildings were visible, and I estimated the settlement would have housed around 30 people. Sharon helped me set up my tent, and then gave me a tour of the site. There were 5 of us at the site in total. I had no specific job, but suspected I was mainly going to be doing the physical work. Sharon had 20 years experience on me, and as the site lead would be responsible for writing reports, the university was going through an efficiency drive, and she had to submit daily reports to justify the expense of the dig. Mark and Penny were undergrads, and Justin was an 18-year-old taking a gap year. So as the second most senior person there, I was also in charge of documentation. We were a very young group, and only Sharon and I were taking any remuneration for the work. If we proved the site worthy of additional funding before Justin, Penny, and Mark had to go home, no doubt more experienced archaeologists would take their place. So I was very conscious that I had a limited time to prove myself. This was October, and by the time I had set myself up, the light was fading fast. But keen to get to grips with the site, I spent the last hour of daylight studying the layout, sketching and making measurements. Given my knowledge of similar settlements, I made some predictions regarding the extent of the site, and where we might find further buildings. Judging from the rest of the architecture, I figured the settlement might be post-Christian, and estimated possible locations for a church. I spent the next 2 days looking for the church. Given the lack of funding, we had a very limited equipment, but I'd been right about the location. On the 3rd day, I uncovered part of a stone wall, a strong indicator of a church, and got Justin and Penny to help me uncover the shape. It was 2 days later that I found it. Justin was off helping Sharon, and Mark was taking lunch, so I was working on my own, uncovering the floor of the church. As I slowly scraped the soil with my trowel, I saw a hint of orange. I pulled out my brush and carefully cleaned the area, to find what looked like an orange thread, buried in the ground at both ends. This concerned me, although at the time, not for the right reasons. Orange thread was far from anything I associated with the Saxons. I called Penny over, as I knew she had an interest in Saxon textiles. She agreed that this was unlike anything she'd seen before. Most likely, the site had been contaminated recently, but we couldn't be sure, so Penny and I brushed the area to reveal more. After an hour, we had uncovered a network of threads about half a meter across. They ran through the ground in an organic pattern, like fungal mycelium. One thread had been uncovered sufficiently for Penny to put her finger underneath and lift it up. Before I could stop her, the thread snapped. It quickly turned to dust, causing my nose to itch and Penny to sneeze. I reprimanded her for her carelessness, and we then agreed to cover it up. It was early evening, and we didn't want moisture to affect the area. Our limited budget hadn't even given us an excavation shelter, so we just put up a sheet of polythene over the area and weighed it down with stones. Sharon knew no more than we did about the likely provenance of the orange threads. She took some photos and told us to leave it undisturbed until some of her colleagues had a chance to review it, and with the sun setting, and Sharon typing up her daily report, the rest of us had a couple of beers and settled into sleep. I woke around 6 the next morning to the sound of car engines. Pulling on my shoes and coat, I crawled out of the tent. Sharon and Mark were already up, watching 4 black SUVs pull up and park next to the camp. A man in a crisp black suit stepped out of the lead car and demanded curtly to speak to the project lead. He and Sharon walked off and began talking. I couldn't make out much, but I did hear Sharon raise her voice in argument a few times. The others were out of their tents now, and we spent about 15 minutes in wild conjecture until Sharon and the suit walked back. Sharon told us that the project was over, and we needed to pack our tents and leave immediately. Of course, we argued. The dig could make my career, and besides, Penny and I were very keen to learn more about the orange threads. There was no way these interlopers had the slightest clue about archaeology, and would no doubt ruin the site if left alone with it. But in half an hour we'd packed our things and were in our cars. During the whole time nobody else stepped foot out of the black SUVs. We left, and Sharon gave me a lift back home. I was in a dark mood that evening. I hadn't pleased my line manager at the bank when I'd quit without notice, so doubted they'd take me back, and it looked like my chance for a PhD was gone. But in the morning I settled down to search for jobs. I got a phone call. Sharon wanted the 5 of us to continue working. We may have been kicked off the dig site, but they couldn't stop us reviewing what we'd found so far. So on Monday I met Sharon, Mark, and Penny in a cafeteria at the university. Justin had apparently made other plans. Between sketches, measurements, notes, and photographs, we had actually gathered quite a lot of data, and it would likely take a couple of weeks to review it all. Sharon worked with Penny on mapping out the site in detail, and I worked with Mark on a literature review of comparable sites. But as the day wore on, I started to feel unaccountably wary of Mark. I'd got on with him very well at the site, but now he felt off somehow. The more I looked at him, the more I felt uncomfortable, as though being in the same room was dangerous, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The next day didn't ease my feelings. Something just seemed wrong. Not the creepy guy vibe I've got off some men, but more a sense that he was planning something nefarious. I confided in Penny over a coffee at lunch, and she confessed that she had got a similar feeling from Sharon. By Wednesday I was feeling a little under the weather, but able to go in. When the 4 of us met, Mark asked if I was okay. I wouldn't normally remark on this, but the way Mark said it, it felt very accusatory. Sharon said I should work from home. I glanced at Penny, who just shrugged. Were Mark and Sharon planning something? To be honest, Mark and Sharon looked worse than I felt. Pale, perhaps, and their posture seemed vaguely threatening. I didn't want to leave them unsupervised, and insisted that I was fine to continue. Before settling down to work, I managed to catch Penny alone at the coffee machine. "Do I look okay to you?" I opened. "Yeah, a bit tired maybe. I thought they were out of order back there." "I don't trust them. Can you keep an eye on Sharon?" "Sure. Actually, I was going to say the same to you. See if Mark's acting weird. We can catch up at lunch." I found Mark in the spare office we were using with the papers already out. As we got to work, I studied Mark, noting his expression and posture. Again, it was subtle, but there was definitely something not right. I caught his dark brown eyes, and for an instant, they seemed to flash orange. Then suddenly he exploded. "What?" "What do you mean?" I replied calmly. "You've been staring at me all morning. Have you got something to say?" "No, What could I say? Look, if you want to ask me out, just come out and say it." I was astonished. What did he think was going on? I had no idea what to do. We should just... I looked down at my papers. I started to collate the citations, but had barely listed them all when Mark said he was going to lunch. It couldn't have been 10 o'clock yet, but when I looked at my phone, it was 12:30. I glanced at Mark's work, and he'd done at least 3 hours worth of work. I'd felt a bit unwell, sure, but how had I lost 2 hours? Mark got up and left. I could have carried on, but Penny had agreed to meet for lunch, so I headed down to the cafeteria to find her sat down by herself. I grabbed a sandwich and water and joined her. So, Penny started in a low, conspiratorial voice. Anything to report? I recounted the outburst, the strange conversation, the odd body language. I almost didn't mention the flash of orange I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, in Mark's eyes, but when I did, Penny gasped. I saw that too. In Mark? No, in Sharon. Wow, okay, that's weird. Any ideas? Well, I wasn't going to say it. I thought it was my imagination, but... Penny leaned in closely and lowered her voice even more. You remember the threads we found at the dig? Of course, they... Suddenly I realized what she meant. They were the same orange, weren't they? What does it mean? I don't know, I replied, but I've got an idea. Let's meet at 5. No, I don't feel good staying here with Sharon. Tell her you've decided to go home after all, and I'll make up some excuse. Why don't we meet in my halls of residence? It's only 10 minutes from here. So Penny and I left the department early. Penny had a single room in her halls of residence, even smaller than my old one, and we cleared as much space as we could on her tiny desk. She offered me a coffee, but I didn't feel like one, and neither did she. The coffee that morning had tasted very bitter, so with a glass of water each and some notebooks, we started writing everything we knew. What's cordyceps? Penny had glanced over at my notes before I was ready to compare. I explained what I knew. It's a fungus. It infects ants and controls their brain. It takes them somewhere more suitable for the fungus to grow, and slowly eats them, converting their body into more of itself. Penny looked disgusted for a moment and then realized what I was getting at. The orange threads from the dig site that were most likely mycelia. Had they infected Sharon and Mark? Penny opened her laptop and googled cordyceps. I'd got a few things wrong, but the basic principle was correct. Do you think that's what it was? Well, no, not cordyceps. That only infects ants, but something like it, something that can control humans, would have to be more complex, I suppose. Well, we both saw the orange in their eyes. The eyes are part of your brain, sort of. I guess it would explain their weird behavior, right? We talked about this for a long time, bouncing theories off each other. Something that could infect the complex brain of a human, well, it would have to be more sophisticated. The government agents that had closed down our dig sites had arrived so quickly, they must have already known about the fungus, but not about that site. So there must be other sites. Could they be linked together, operating as a neural network across the country, even across the planet, an intelligent fungus, infecting hosts to achieve whatever their aims might be? We realized that the agents had arrived too late. I don't know why they didn't quarantine us, but we had no way of contacting them. We could have asked Sharon, but if she was far enough gone, she wouldn't help us. We had to do something ourselves. I don't remember whether it was myself or Penny who said it first, but we reluctantly agreed that it was the only option. We had to stop the infection from spreading. We sat up late into the night planning our next steps, and I slept on Penny's floor. I'd gone home sick that day, and I would pretend to be ill and collect the equipment we needed, except for the car. Penny texted her brother asking to borrow his, saying she needed it for a university project. The next morning, Penny went into the department. I tried to persuade her not to, but she insisted that somebody needed to keep an eye on the disease's progression. She was right, of course. I spent the day gathering supplies. It would have been easier to wait for the car, but we had to move fast. I met Penny that afternoon, somewhat relieved that she was okay, and her brother dropped the car off. He wanted to stay and enjoy the university life for a night, but we had work to do, so Penny made some half-hearted excuse and he took the last train home. We checked our equipment, went over the plan again, and for a second night I slept on Penny's floor. The next day we went to the university. I walked while Penny drove so that we didn't arrive together and arouse suspicion. That morning was one of the most difficult few hours of my life, pretending to Mark that everything was normal. He looked different, twisted somehow, though nobody but Penny and I seemed to notice. Sharon was the same. We took Sharon and Mark out for lunch. We told them that we were so happy to be a part of this project and we wanted to repay them. Our treat, we said. Sharon protested, saying that it should be her to pay for all of us, but eventually they agreed. I normally like Mexican food, but it tasted strangely sour, as though the ingredients had gone off somehow. But we weren't there for pleasure. Our plan was risky, but it worked. I won't explain what the drug was or how I obtained it, but I managed to slip it into Sharon's and Mark's food without them noticing. We kept them there, celebrating for an hour or so, long enough for the drug to take effect. By this time, Sharon and Mark were feeling ill, and Penny offered to drive them back to the department. She had left her car in the restaurant's car park, and we helped them into the back seat. I got into the passenger seat, and Penny started to drive. Of course, we weren't going back to the university. We drove about half an hour out of town to an area of scrubland, far from any houses, and drove out of sight of the main road. Penny feigned concern and suggested to Sharon and Mark that they might want to get some fresh air. Eventually they agreed and we helped them out of the car. We then went back to the car, collecting the 2 hammers I'd brought the previous day. Drugged as they were, we still needed to take them by surprise. I struck Mark 3 times in the head, and Penny hit Sharon twice. That was enough to stop them moving. I don't know for sure if they were dead at this point, but we were sure there was no coming back from that. Penny covered the back seats with plastic sheeting while I did my best to make sure their injuries weren't obvious. Then we put them back in the car. Penny drove for 4 hours while I navigated, and as night started to fall, we arrived back at the cursed dig site. We had expected this to be the most difficult part of our plan, but the agents were nowhere to be seen. I had no idea why not. For all their apparent aggressiveness, did they not realize precisely what they were dealing with? The alternative, that they had themselves become infected, was too terrible to contemplate. Still, it made our task far easier. We parked as close as we could and dragged the bodies the remaining 50 meters to lay them in the ruined church. If they were infected, then so was the ground, and we could at least contain the infection. Also, it was likely that nobody would encounter the bodies for months or perhaps years to come, and so we left Sharon and Mark to rot in the infected soil and drove back. It was 4 in the morning when we arrived, and we went back to Penny's room. Our task was done, or so we thought. We celebrated with a bottle of wine, but the wine had gone sour, so we abandoned it and went with water instead. At that point, it was Saturday morning. Neither of us were feeling great, and we spent most of the weekend in Penny's small bed watching Netflix. We decided to go in on Monday morning so as not to arouse suspicion, and continue working on the archaeological write-up. Over the course of that day, we realized that we'd acted too late. Other people in the department had strange expressions, or orange twisted veins in their eyes. We went out for lunch, each having a salad and water, and our server looked infected as well. I don't understand why Penny and I are the only ones who can see it. Our task is clear now, though. We've done it before, and we can do it again. We must do it again. We must cleanse the world of this fungus, killing the infected and taking their bodies to that ancient Saxon church, before it spreads beyond our control. if it hasn't already. I grew up in a haunted house. The whole family knew the house was haunted. We'd all experienced paranormal events together and apart within the house. It was never a constant, everyday thing. There would be periods of inactivity and periods of activity. There were hot spots you could avoid to try and keep from having a pretty bad experience, but there were no guarantees. My mom believed the ghosts were there to help her. I have no idea what gave her that idea. None of what they did was the slightest bit friendly. It wasn't unusual to be in real physical danger. Humans are very adaptable. They can live in just about any environment if given the time to adjust. I had adjusted. I was 13 years old and waking up for school. The house hadn't made a peep in months. The morning was peaceful, the scent of tea and toast. My grandmother waiting to take me to school. There was nothing to indicate something was wrong. The temperature had dropped, no unusual noises, no glass flying across the rooms. Still, my stomach was in knots. Usually when I'd get a bad feeling, I couldn't wait to leave the house. This time, I dreaded the thought. I asked my grandma to let me stay home. That was a hard no. You didn't miss school unless you were dying. Not on Gram's watch. Besides, she'd come just to ready me and get me to school. Mom was passed out in bed as usual. She was a drunk. It wouldn't be till noon or later that she'd rise out of bed for some coffee and smokes. At school, I was a wreck. I just knew something sinister was happening at home. My school wasn't far. I could easily walk there and back. I couldn't tell you why Gram always insisted on dropping me off and picking me up. I decided to bail. I walked off the school property and in the direction of home. The closer I got, the sicker I felt. More than once I was overcome with nausea and forced to sit down. When I finally made it to my house, I was chilled to the bone. There, it stood dark and unforgiving, more menacing than it had ever felt before. I felt physically repelled away from it. Something in me screamed to not go in. The thought of my mother passed out inside forced me up the front steps. When I walked in, the house was dark and cold. My grandmother always opened up all the curtains to let the sunshine in every morning. They had all been closed. Not a single light was on. My teeth were chattering. It had been warm just outside. I called for my mom and headed for her bedroom. Her usual spot in bed was empty. Next, I headed for the garage, her smoking spot. She wasn't there either. She wasn't responding to me. I searched the entire upstairs. No mom. The house was upside down, meaning you were upstairs when you entered. The downstairs was the spookiest area of the whole house. No one ever went down there. I stared down the steps and called for my mom again. No answer. With a heavy heart, I descended the steps. The downstairs had a living room and a master bedroom. Despite many attempts to make it a livable space, its issues stopped it from becoming anything but a no man's land. Electricity hardly worked down there. When it did choose to work, you could count on it only lighting a single lamp. The master bedroom would have been beautiful, but its accompanied master bath had been left in unfinished ruins. The master bath was the one room you could always count on something paranormal happening. It was a room full of dirt, rats, and wooden support beams. The only fully constructed thing in there was a small door. It was at the back of the room, no taller than that of a 4-year-old child. The door was ornate. Carvings were etched in with gold trim and a golden handle. It led to a secret entrance/exit at the side of the home. My mother, and father before he left, had spent thousands attempting to finish that bathroom. Construction workers frequently quit. Anything that did get built fell apart. And like the rest of the downstairs, electricity refused its job. Mom kept that door bolted up, and we all knew why. I was in the living room and turned to find the bedroom door open. Even worse, inside the bedroom, the master bath door was also wide open. A deep dread filled me. At this point, I was sobbing. I was begging my mother to answer me. I could see she wasn't in the living room or the bedroom. I did not want to check the closets or the bathroom. I walked to the open doorway of what would have been the master bath. It was just as I'd remembered. Pitch black, cold, horrifying. I called my mother's name into the darkness, and this time I got a reply. "Tamsin, help, I've hurt my ankle." I rushed inside. The door swung closed behind me. I swung around to try and open it, but it wouldn't budge. I tried not to panic. The little door was there in the darkness. I would have to cross the expanse of the room to get to it, but I knew it would open. I don't know how, but I'd always inherently known that the door was an escape hatch. For situations such as these. "Mom?" Nothing. My eyes were slowly adjusting to the dark. It was a dangerous room to explore blind. It was unfinished, and it didn't even have a floor. Nails and other tools had been discarded by construction workers over the many years of the house's life. Mom hadn't been the only owner to try and fail with that cursed room. Though I could always hear rats from the room, I never saw a single one. "Mom?" Nothing. My eyes explored the shapes of the room. The beams, a blue tarp. No Mom. In the distance I could see a doorknob. My way out. I continued to call for my mother as I carefully maneuvered my way to the door. If this ever had been made a bathroom, it would have been huge. Relief flooded me like a drug when I finally reached the little door. Its golden handle was warm in my hand, seemingly unaffected by the chill of the room. "Tamsin, I'm over here. You're going the wrong way. My ankle." Mom's voice. It was coming all the way back from where I'd started, the door in the bedroom. I opened the little door to let the sun shine in. Maybe it would let me see through the darkness. "Tamsin, no, don't leave me in here." She was practically shrieking. The sunlight illuminated very little of the room. I couldn't see all the way across the voice's origin. I stood by the sunlight, unwilling to leave the safety of its warmth. "Mom, you aren't answering me." "I'm sorry, I'm in so much pain. I think it's broken. Please come get me." "I'm going to call 911. "No, don't leave me in here, please." She sounded desperate. The situation was far too strange. I was hesitant to leave her in the room and hesitant to believe she was there at all. It did make sense to me why she'd want so badly to leave that room, but I still hadn't seen her, and I wanted out of that room myself. "Can you move? Try to come towards the light." I can't move. You need to come get me." "Why were you down here?" "I thought the cat had gotten in here. I heard noises." This was too plausible. The cat would occasionally meow from inside the room, with both doors leading inside still locked up tight. We never did figure out how she got in there. "Mom, I'm scared. I'm going to call 911. You need help." "No, don't leave me alone down here." It sounded like she had begun to cry. Tears rolled down my face as well. "I couldn't lift you even if I found you. We need help." "I could get up with your help. Just come and get me." "Where are you? I wasn't able to find you when I came in." "I'm right by the door. Now come get me." I was still hesitant. My instinct told me not to leave the safety of the little door. My logic told me she couldn't be right by the door, or I would have seen her when I'd come in. She claimed she couldn't move. She couldn't have moved spots then, could she? Despite all this, the voice of my mother begging me to stay kept me in place. I told myself I was being silly, that she was hurt. She needed my help. I had to go get her. Suddenly there was a commotion at the front of the house. I could hear it from the little doors opening. Sirens, voices. I was thrilled. I didn't know how help had come, but it had. "Mom, I can hear sirens in the front. I'll lead them to you." Inhuman screaming came from... Mom? Whatever was there in the darkness hovered just outside the sunlight pouring in. It screamed at the sunlight's edge, blowing dust and dirt everywhere. I couldn't see it clearly. Its eyes glowed a pale white, but the glow was dim. By where the eyes were located, this thing was huge. I could only judge its appearance by the movement in the dark. It stood a great height, and when its arms flew out, they extended the expanse of the room. It never crossed the threshold into the sunlight. I scurried through the doorway and ran to the voices I heard in the backyard. That's when I first saw her. Mom was on the ground of the backyard. Blood had pooled underneath her. She was bent in ways no human ever should be. Paramedics were working on her. They didn't even notice me until I started screaming. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in a truck wrapped in a blanket. Grammy drove in and held me in her arms. Turns out Mom had gone out onto the deck that morning after we'd left. She'd hoisted herself up on the wooden railing and took a swan dive onto the cement patch below. She had remained there broken and unconscious until our neighbor saw her from her own back deck. It took months to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Still, she survived. She spent the rest of her life in agony from the injuries. She walked with a hunched back, unable to stand straight up, and she limped from a broken leg and shattered ankle. She was never able to climb the stairs of the house again. She never said a thing to me about what happened, why she had done it, but I did learn from Grammy that when she finally came to, she told the doctors that a demon had chased her onto and over the ledge. Living in northern Minnesota and being a horror lover, I was always paranoid but skeptical of the not deer. I thought I might have had a few encounters, but you can't be sure when you don't come face to face with something. I'm a see it before you believe it kind of guy. Now, of course, I believe. Good Lord, do I believe, because I think I pissed one off. Like I said, I live in northern Minnesota. I have a big German Shepherd, her name is Stella, that I love to take on walks in the nearby woods. The forest is massive, but it's beautiful. I've never gone in too deep or at night. Being eaten by a bear isn't exactly on my bucket list. But a buddy of mine likes to go deer hunting in the woods during hunting season. He likes going in deep and camps out for days. He invited me along since it was that time of year, and reluctantly, I agreed. Stella came with for some added protection. I was no good with a gun, but I did bow hunting, so I packed up my weapon of choice, some clothes and whatnot. The basics and then some. Then some being a six-pack and some backup Newports. I know, Newports are blah. We hiked our way out of Mason's favorite hunting spot, a small field near a river. We set up camp in the field, and for the first night, we just talked and went to bed. Come morning, it was hunting time. We woke up about 8 in the morning and got to it. All dolled up in camo, we sat patiently with the trees, waiting for a thirsty deer. We missed 2, caught 1. Not too shabby. We headed back to camp, ate dinner, drank a little. I noticed Stella was on edge. I figured she'd heard a noise out in the woods. "What is it, Stella? Squirrel scared ya?" I laughed and patted her on the head. "No, wait, listen," Mason said, and I did. "Do you hear that?" I gave him a "are you messing with me" look. I heard nothing but the fire crackling. After listening a little closer, I realized what he meant. I heard nothing. No frogs, No crickets, no birds, no rustling in the surrounding woods. Okay, now I'm freaked out. Then I saw something. It was on all fours, kinda hunched over and massive. Of course, a bear. Must have scared everything off, but it looked real thin for a bear. I got out my bow, lining up the shot. No way in hell was I getting eaten by some starving bear tonight. Mason didn't protest, so I shot. It hit the bear, but it didn't react. A few seconds later, it's charging at us at full speed. What is that? I screamed. Stella went running into the forest, and me and Mason were frozen in fear. That was no bear. It looked deformed, gray, thin, and it was tall. Wendigos don't look like what you see in mainstream media. The skin is gray and tight, their bodies bony, and the teeth are huge. Mason quickly grabbed his gun, but a few rounds did nothing. We ran towards the tree line as fast as we could, but it was gaining on us. It's a Wendigo. Ethan, we need to hide, Mason yelled. We made a rapid dash into the forest. We ran on rocks over the river, but I slipped and fell into the water. Mason quickly helped me up. Surely the monster was even closer now. We jumped over a fallen tree and took cover by it. Fast footsteps approached us, and we could hear it. Its breathing sounding musty. And the smell was pungent, like a rotting body. I held a finger to my lips, telling Mason to be quiet. I had a hand over my mouth to muffle my breathing. When it finally left, we slowly left our hiding spot. Running back to our campsite, we only grabbed what we needed before heading our way back to the trails. We were far out, about 12 miles, and we knew it would take a long time to find our way back in the dark. After half an hour of walking, we sat to take a break. It seemed like we were safe now. I was worried sick about Stella, my sweet girl, but we had to keep going. That's when I heard a familiar barking a few yards out. "Stella?" I yelled. "Stella, come here, girl. It's all right, Stella." I ran towards the sound, happy to find my dog. The barking started coming from all around me, and I was confused. Then it stopped suddenly. It was dead silent again. I felt my body freeze and my heart stop. "Ethan, get back here. It's a trap. The Wendigo is mimicking Stella. Run!" Mason yelled out to me. No, this can't be happening. Then I heard Mason scream. I whispered an apology and ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran like hell. I heard it following me, the fast, inhuman running. Then suddenly I was tackled to the ground. The thing looked me dead in the eyes, inching closer and closer, drooling on me. It had blood on its mouth. Blood. Mason's blood. It sunk its teeth into my shoulder. I screamed and shoved a finger into its eye. It popped. It was disgusting. The thing got off me screaming and putting a hand over its eye. I took the opportunity to run. My shoulder burned. It took a chunk when it got off. I knew I was definitely going to have a scar after this. All I could do was run. I just kept going until finally it all went black. I was found the next day by park rangers, and now I'm in the hospital. I've been here for a few days being treated for a serious infection, blood loss, and I might need surgery on my shoulder and back. Turns out I damaged my spine when I was thrown to the ground. Mason hasn't been found, and I'm not sure I want to know what happened to him. On a good note, they found Stella. She found some campers and they took care of her. I'm still scared. I live right next to those woods. At night I can't sleep, and sometimes I'll hear tapping on the window. I'm on the 7th floor, so I hope to God it's just my imagination. If those things can climb, I'm fleeing the country. Sometimes I hear something saying my name and it sounds like Mason. But not Mason. If anything happens, I'll update, but for now, I'm just gonna relax while I recover. Please, for the love of God, do not piss off a Wendigo.